Comment down what you think about these stories or just a hello and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. I was moving into my new apartment and didn't have much furniture yet. My budget was tight as a recent college grad, so I browsed Craigslist for free stuff. I came across an ad for a free couch that looked to be in decent shape. The seller said they were redecorating and just wanted it gone fast. This seemed too good to be true, so I emailed right away before someone else could claim it. The seller quickly responded and asked for my address so they could deliver the couch that same day. At first I hesitated, not sure if I felt comfortable giving my address to a stranger, but the couch did look nice and they seemed eager to get rid of it. I rationalized that it was broad daylight and decided to take the risk. Within an hour, an older sedan pulled up outside my apartment with a couch tied to the roof. A man and woman got out and introduced themselves as John and Marie. They were an older couple, probably in their 60s. John was tall and thin with short gray hair. Marie was heavyset with curly black hair. They were both dressed casually. They carried the couch into my apartment and I showed them where to set it up. It fit perfectly in my small living room. I was thrilled to finally have a comfortable place to sit. John and Marie lingered, saying they had driven a long way and asking if they could use my bathroom. I hesitated since I had just met them, but let them use it to be polite. While John was in the bathroom, Marie asked for a glass of water. I went to the kitchen to get it for her. When I returned, she was looking at the photos on my bookshelf and asking me questions about my family and friends. I started to feel uncomfortable with her snooping. John came out of the bathroom and also started walking around, commenting on my decorations and belongings. He picked up items to look at them closer. It was like they were casing my place. I subtly hinted that I needed to leave for an appointment, hoping they would take a cue to wrap up the visit. But they kept lingering, sitting on the new couch and making small talk. After 15 minutes of this, I finally asked if they needed help carrying anything else to their car. Thankfully, they got the hint and said they should get going. After they left, I felt immediate relief, but their visit left me unsettled. They did seem so friendly and helpful at first, but the more they hung around, poking around my apartment, the more sinister it felt. I chided myself for accepting a delivery from total strangers. Over the next few days, I kept checking that my doors and windows were locked. John and Marie knew where I lived now. What if they came back to rob me when I wasn't home? What else were they casing during their visit? I decided to take precautions just in case. I bought new deadbolt locks and extra security devices. I also told my landlord about the incident in case anything strange happened around the building. Weeks went by without incident before my paranoia finally faded. I never saw John or Marie again. I'll always be more cautious about interacting with strangers online now, but at least I got a free couch out of it, even if the delivery experience was creepier than expected. The takeaway is to always listen to your gut. Don't ignore red flags just to be nice or take advantage of a deal. And make sure you really know who's coming into your home, even if they seem harmless at first. One can never be too safe these days. I couldn't stop thinking about John and Marie's strange visit. Why had they lingered so long, snooping around my apartment? What did they really want? My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe they cased places for burglaries, or were looking for prescription drugs to steal. Perhaps they were trying to get information for identity theft. Anything seemed possible with sketchy strangers who come into your home. I decided to do some research online to see if there were any reports of similar encounters. To my surprise, I found a few localized warnings on neighborhood forums. Other people had described an older man and woman who responded to online ads, showed up with furniture deliveries, and then overstayed their welcome. The descriptions matched John and Marie. Apparently, they had been pulling this routine for a while, using free furniture as a ploy to gain access to people's homes. But no one knew their actual motive yet. Nothing seemed to be stolen immediately, but folks reported feeling violated after they left. The more I read, the more rattled I became. How long had they been targeting young people moving into their first apartments? Were they watching my building, waiting for a new victim? I felt like the stupid character in a horror movie, obliviously letting the villains walk right into my home. Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-vigilant about any unusual activity around the building. I peeked out the blinds frequently and scrutinized any unfamiliar faces I saw outside. My neighbors probably thought I was paranoid, but I didn't care. One evening, I thought I spotted John lingering across the street, smoking a cigarette, and gazing out of the building. I quickly shut the blinds, heart pounding, Had he returned to break in now that he knew the layout? I didn't see John again after that, but it took me months to stop worrying they would return. I realized you can never be too skeptical of strangers' motives. One innocent online ad or favor can open the door to much darker intentions. Letting your guard down, even briefly, can dramatically change your sense of safety forever. My run-in with John and Marie was a wake-up call about personal security. Now I'm going to trust my instincts if a situation seems off. Don't ignore those alarms just to grab a deal or help someone out. Your home should be your sanctuary, not an open house for sketchy Craigslist scammers. While nothing sinister happened in the end, the lingering sense of violation stayed with me. I'll never make the mistake again of blindly trusting strangers who come into my home. It's an important lesson that one can simply never be too cautious or safe these days. I've always loved finding good deals online, so when I saw a Craigslist ad for a mystery box full of valuables for only $20, I couldn't resist. The ad didn't provide any details about what was inside, just that it was a huge box packed with expensive items the seller no longer wanted. That price seemed too good to pass up, so I quickly emailed the seller to buy it. A few days later, an unmarked cardboard box arrived at my doorstep. I dragged it inside, excited to tear it open and discover what treasures were inside. As I ripped open the box flaps, a musty odor wafted out. Inside, I found strange objects carelessly packed in old newspapers. Things like antique dolls with cracked porcelain faces, dusty vintage clothing, and creepy figurines. Nothing seemed inherently valuable, just unsettling. Underneath the layer of newspapers, I uncovered a worn shoebox. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid, not knowing what to expect. Nestled inside was a bundle of faded Polaroids showing a smiling young woman I didn't recognize. She looked so full of life in those moments frozen in time. I wondered who she was and why these photos would be left abandoned in this mystery box. I dug deeper into the box, hoping to find some indication of who the woman was or who had owned these odd possessions. Buried beneath everything was a tarnished locket on a gold chain. It looked decades old. My breath caught in my throat as I pried it open to find a tiny braided lock of hair. At that point, chills ran down my spine. This wasn't just some random assortment of junk. These were likely personal items from someone's past, someone who was probably no longer living. I slammed the box shut, feeling sick thinking about where these disturbing objects came from. But morbid curiosity got the better of me, and I started snooping through the box again. Under a moth-eaten sweater, I found a crumbling newspaper clipping for a missing person, a young woman who had disappeared weeks earlier from a town an hour away. Staring at the clipping, my blood ran cold, realizing it was the same smiling face from the Polaroids. I wanted to get rid of the box and its contents, but something stopped me. That night, I had terrible nightmares of the woman calling out to me, begging for help. Her cries echoed in my head even after I woke up in a cold sweat. Over the next few days, strange things started happening around my house. I hear creaking footsteps above me while home alone. Lights would flicker. I constantly felt like I was being watched. The final straw was finding the locket and a Polaroid on my pillow one night when I turned down my sheets. I realized then that I'd brought something sinister into my home. This woman's spirit was reaching out to me, disturbed that I now had her personal belongings. I said prayers over the items and brought the box to a nearby church to have it properly blessed. However, the minister refused to help once I shared its contents. He said some things were better left undisturbed. I ultimately contacted the police and shared my chilling find, hoping they could finally bring closure to this woman's family. They confirmed her disappearance, but seemed at a loss for how her belongings ended up in that mystery box years later. All I wanted was to make a fun purchase from Craigslist. I'd never expected to bring such darkness into my life. I still feel haunted knowing those items are out there somewhere, waiting to unleash their evil again. After this experience, I'll never blindly buy anything online again without knowing its full history. Ignorance is not always bliss when you're dealing with forces beyond our understanding. Sometimes mysteries are better left unsolved. I tried to forget the box and move on with my life, but I remained on edge for weeks, constantly looking over my shoulder. One night, I awoke to the sound of creaking floorboards outside my bedroom. My heart pounded as I grabbed the baseball bat I now kept by my bed. I slowly opened the door and flipped on the hallway light. There at the end of the hall, I saw the shadowy figure of a woman wearing a long, pale gown. Her stringy dark hair hung over her face. She flickered under the dim light like a ghostly apparition. I blinked hard, trying to tell myself this was just a waking nightmare. But when I opened my eyes, she was still there, hovering, watching me. My hands trembled around the bat as she crept towards me, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. I wanted to swing to make this monstrous vision disappear, but some primal part of me knew this was not a fight I could win. As the pale woman drifted closer, I sank to my knees in surrender. When she stood directly before me, so close I could smell damp earth and rot on her, I clenched my eyes shut and prayed for deliverance. I waited for her icy hands to wrap around my neck, but after an eternity nothing happened. When I dared open my eyes again, she had vanished. I never saw the woman again after that night, but I moved out of that house the very next day. I drove over 1,000 miles away, trying to outrun the evil presence that box brought into my life. For better or worse, I'll never know if I truly had escaped her grasp. The mystery of where she came from and what she wanted remains unsolved. All I can do now is keep driving and hope I've finally put enough distance between us to regain some semblance of peace. Though I know deep down she's still out there somewhere, wandering lost among the living. And there are some mysteries that can never be laid fully to rest. I was moving to a new apartment across town and didn't have much money to hire professional movers. My friend told me about Craigslist being a good place to find cheap labor for odd jobs, so I thought I'd give it a try to find some movers. I posted an ad with the details of the move, and I was hoping to pay around $200 for the day's work. Within a few hours, I got some responses, but most were too expensive. Finally, I heard from two guys, Mike and James, who said they had a truck and would do it for $175. That sounded perfect, so we set up a time for them to come over on the morning of the move. The day of the move, I got up early, packed up all my essentials and smaller items in my car, and waited for the movers to arrive. Right on time, a beat-up old truck pulled up with Mike and James. They didn't look like professional movers, just average guys in jeans and t-shirts, but they were energetic and friendly enough. We walked through the apartment and I showed them what needed to go, mainly furniture, some boxes and appliances. They got right to work wrapping up furniture and carrying things downstairs to load their truck. In just a couple hours, they had everything packed up tightly in their truck. It was an old truck but seemed big enough to fit all my stuff. When the loading was done, I went to get my checkbook to pay them the $175 we had agreed on. But when I got back with the check, Mike said there was a misunderstanding. They now wanted $400 for the job. I couldn't believe it. We had agreed on $175. When I told them I didn't have that kind of money, they just shrugged and said, "No money, no moving truck." I pleaded with them, trying to explain I was a struggling student and didn't have hundreds of extra dollars. But they didn't care, they just kept demanding more money and saying they wouldn't drive my stuff over to the new place until they got paid what they wanted. I was starting to get really worried. All my possessions were loaded in their truck and I couldn't afford what they were asking for. Finally, after a lot of arguing, they gave me an ultimatum. Come up with $300 cash or they would drive away with the truck and see how much your stuff fetches online. I was panicked now, thinking about them stealing and selling all my furniture, clothes, and family heirlooms. But I only had about $50 cash on me. There was no way I could get $300 together quickly. I begged them just to take my original $175 payment and unload at my new apartment. But Mike just sneered and told me shouldn't have hired movers off Craigslist, kid. And with that, they slammed the truck doors shut and started driving away down the street. I chased after them, yelling for them to stop, but the truck sped off, carrying everything I owned. I was in shock. It was a nightmare. How could I have been so stupid to hire sketchy movers online and just hand over my belongings? Now I had nothing except my suitcase of essentials in my car. No clothes, furniture, kitchen stuff, even my laptop with years of files was gone. I went to the police to report everything that happened, but they said there wasn't much they could do. The movers were using fake names, obviously, and could be long gone with my stuff. The officer said goods stolen through moving scams usually just end up sold on the black market or in pawn shops. It was a painful lesson about being too trusting and trying to save money. I ended up having to slowly buy new cheap furniture and basics from thrift stores as I could afford it. Weeks later, I thought I spotted my dining table for sale on a Craigslist ad, but there was no way to prove it. Every time I moved after that, I used a professional moving company, paying more for the peace of mind. But I'll never forget the nightmare of having all my possessions stolen by con artists on Craigslist. Some deals that seem too good to be true really are. The weeks after the move were incredibly difficult. I was basically living out of my suitcase in an empty apartment. I had to sleep on the floor since my bed was stolen. I'd eat takeout food while sitting on the bare living room carpet because I had no furniture left. Showering was a pain without any towels or shower curtain. It really made me realize how much I took for granted. My family helped out a little bit by giving me an old air mattress to sleep on and letting me do laundry at their house. A couple friends also loaned me some kitchen supplies like pots, plates, and silverware so I could cook simple meals. But it was hard not having my own stuff and feeling like such a victim. I scoured thrift stores and garage sales to slowly furnish the new apartment as cheaply as possible. The first thing I bought was a used futon, so I at least had something to sleep on instead of the floor. I also got a small kitchen table with chairs and some mismatched dishes. It felt good to start rebuilding, even though my new stuff was shabby. Having my laptop stolen was a big loss too. I had to carefully save up to buy a used computer so I could do schoolwork and job search. Losing all those documents, photos, and digital files hurt, and not having a TV or my music collection made the empty apartment pretty dreary. The worst part was just feeling violated that strangers had come in and ripped off my belongings. I kept having angry thoughts and fantasies about tracking down the movers and getting revenge. But realistically, I knew all I could do was accept it as an expensive mistake and try to move on. I still get paranoid anytime I need to hire someone off Craigslist now, though. Whether it's a handyman or selling something, I'm very cautious about who I let come to my home. I'll never make that kind of mistake again. Sometimes I wonder what happened to all my old stuff. Maybe my chairs are sitting in their kitchen or my clothes got sold at a garage sale. It pains me to think my personal items are scattered in the homes of criminals, but at least over time, I've been able to buy new things and make the apartment feel like home again. Even years later, I still get angry and sad sometimes about what those movers put me through. I was moving abroad for a new job and needed someone to solo my apartment while I was gone. I posted an ad on Craigslist and got a response from a guy named James who seemed nice and responsible in our emails back and forth. We agreed on terms and I gave him a tour of the place. He said he worked nights as a security guard and just needed a quiet place to sleep during the day, so he thought my apartment would be perfect. I felt good about renting to James. He was polite, paid the deposit and first month's rent on time, and assured me he'd take good care of the place. The day came for me to leave, and I handed James the keys, hoping I'd return in a year to find my apartment in the same condition I left it. When I got back, I immediately knew something was wrong. There was a strange smell coming from inside. I opened the door and was horrified by what I saw. The place was an absolute mess with trash, dirty dishes, and clothes strewn everywhere. There were huge stains on the carpets, and the walls had holes punched in them. My furniture was broken and appliances were missing, and my personal belongings were gone. As I walked through the apartment, I noticed clothes and random items that didn't belong to me. In the bathroom, the sink was clogged with hair and remnants of strange rituals. Candles were melted down all over the floors, and occult symbols were carved into the walls. In the bedroom closet, I found a locked box. I pried it open to discover stacks of disturbing photographs. My skin crawled imagining the things that must have gone on here while I was away. Who was this guy I had rented to, and how did he completely destroy my place in a matter of months? In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator door and shrieked at the rotting smell emanating from inside. On the counter was a bowl with a half-eaten meal now covered in thick mold. It was like James had just up and vanished one day, leaving behind a fully furnished nightmare. I decided to get out of there and go through the rest of the apartment another time. As I headed for the front door, I noticed a piece of paper taped up that I must have missed before. In sloppy handwriting it read, "Couldn't stick to our arrangement. Bad things will happen if you talk. Everything you love Bjorn's if you talk. Police won't help you. I'll know if you talk." A chill ran down my spine. What kind of sick person was this? What arrangement was he talking about? I wanted answers, but I also wanted to get as far away from this place as possible. I later contacted the police, who said without evidence of James' real identity, there wasn't much they could do. All they knew was the name I was given, James, which was likely fake. No fingerprints or paper trail to go on. I also learned I wasn't the only one fooled. James had pulled this same rental scam on others before disappearing without a trace. He lures you in with a friendly facade only to upend your life in unimaginable ways. I'll never rent any property of mine to a stranger again. The financial hit I took was nothing compared to the psychological toll of knowing someone violated and corrupted every inch of your personal space. My nightmares are now haunted by the ghostly visage of James and the slow realization that I really knew nothing about him at all. I replay our initial meetings and look for clues I must have missed at the time. Were there signs of his deviance that I ignorantly overlooked? Or was he simply that skilled at deception and putting on a charming exterior? I sought therapy to help process the trauma of having my home turned into a sinister playground while I was oceans away, but no amount of counseling can erase the unease I feel in spaces that should be safe havens. I wrestle with irrational doubts and suspicions when meeting new people now, no matter how harmless they seem. My trust in others has been shaken to the core. The police couldn't offer me any solace or closure. James covered his tracks far too well. I combed through my correspondence with him trying to find any details the cops may have overlooked, but his digital footprint is negligible and leads nowhere. He was a ghost who slipped into my life to sow destruction before vanishing without explanation. I eventually moved out of that apartment. Too many bad memories lingered within those walls. When the lease ended, I was relieved to be free of it, but phantom sensations of being watched still follow me. I know it's illogical, yet I can't escape the creeping paranoia that James is still out there keeping tabs on me. Sometimes at night, I'll jolt awake, certain that I heard footsteps in the house or saw a shadowy figure outside my window. But when I investigate, there's no one around. James got so far into my head that he left traces of himself lurking in the darkest corners of my mind. Rationally, I know he has likely moved on to other unsuspecting victims unaware of the horror show they are enabling by giving him access. But he made this deeply personal when he chose to unleash his demons in my home. The sanctuary I had built for myself was desecrated without mercy. I went from picturing a quiet stranger reading books on the couch while I was gone to imagining depraved rituals and sins staining every room. He left just enough clues to let my imagination run wild with what happened here. The not knowing and inability to hold him accountable is what haunts me most now. Some nights I still have to sleep with the lights on, half expecting the darkness to birth some new unnatural terror. I installed a security system and have multiple locks on my doors, but there are some voids inside me no hardware store items can fill. My only hope is time will gradually retrain my nerves and allow me to move forward. But that lingering doubt about whether James still stalks me from the shadows may never fully subside. For now, keeping vigilant and staying around people I trust is the best I can do to take my life back. Though I'll forever be changed by what that sinister stranger did inside my home and head. My days of blindly seeing only the good in others and taking comfort within my own walls are gone. The violation cut too deep and paranoia etched itself into all the empty spaces left behind. I was in a tight spot after losing my job a few months back. My savings were dwindling fast and I needed to find a cheap place to stay, at least until I could get back on my feet. Scrolling through Craigslist, I came across an ad for a room in a house near downtown. The rent was unbelievably cheap, just a few $100 a month. It seemed a little suspicious, but I was desperate, so I emailed the landlord to set up a tour. We arranged a time to meet at the house the next day. It was in an older part of town with overgrown trees and peeling paint on the other homes. As I walked up to the house, I noticed the windows were all covered with heavy drapes, making it impossible to see inside. A bit strange, but nothing too out of the ordinary. A man answered the door. He looked to be in his 50s, with rumpled clothes and nervous eyes that shifted around, never making eye contact. He introduced himself as Gary and led me inside. The place wasn't dirty exactly, but it had a musty, stale smell like it hadn't been aired out in ages. Gary showed me the kitchen, bathroom, and the small bedroom that would be mine if I wanted it. So far, nothing seemed too alarming other than Gary's odd behavior. He mumbled when he talked and wrung his hands continuously. As we walked down the hall, I noticed there were 3 other closed doors. I asked Gary if the other rooms were occupied. A look of panic flashed across his face, but he quickly regained composure. "No, those are just extra storage rooms that I keep locked up," he said with a nervous laugh. I thought it was strange to have so many unused rooms in such a small house. I also noticed scratch marks around the door frames and what looked like fingerprints smudged on the doors. We returned to the living room to discuss move-in details. Gary sat across from me, rocking back and forth ever so slightly in his chair. Just as I was about to ask about the lease, I thought I heard a muffled thump come from down the hall, like something bumping against the wall. I paused and listened closely as more faint noises drifted out. A scraping sound, a dull knock, what sounded like a muted voice. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Gary's eyes widened, and he started sputtering. "Oh, well, no, I didn't hear anything. It's just an old house, makes weird noises all the time, Pa." He let out an unhinged little giggle that made my skin crawl. The noises had stopped, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling swirling in my gut. What was behind those locked doors? Gary changed the subject back to the rental terms, but I could barely pay attention as I strained to listen for more odd sounds. I knew something wasn't right here. Gary was clearly on edge, avoiding eye contact and tripping over his words. It dawned on me that I needed to get out of there fast. I abruptly stood up and said I had another appointment to get to, but that I'd be in touch about the room soon. Gary's face fell as I walked towards the front door. He called after me, "Wait, are you sure you don't want to see the room one more time?" I didn't dare turn back. Once outside, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I hurried to my car, my pulse racing. Looking back at the house, I noticed the drapes swaying in an upstairs window, as if someone had been peering out at me. A chill went down my spine. I jumped in my car, locked the doors, and sped off, watching the house shrink smaller and smaller in my rear-view mirror until it disappeared from sight. I never contacted Gary again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was happening in that house. The memory of those eerie locked rooms and faint cries for help behind the doors still haunt me. I wonder who else has taken a room in that house, desperate like me for a cheap place to stay. I wish I had done more at the time, but I was frightened and not thinking clearly. All I can do now is be thankful I trusted my instincts to get out when I did. Sometimes places that seem too good to be true often hide the darkest of secrets. I don't think I'll ever look for housing deals on Craigslist again. In the weeks following my visit to Gary's house, I found myself compulsively checking the local news and police reports, looking for any indication that something sinister had been discovered at that address. But there were no updates, no alarming headlines about bodies found bricked up in basements or kidnapped victims rescued from soundproof rooms. Just the endless mundane happenings of everyday life going on as normal. Part of me wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if there was a reasonable explanation for the locked doors and strange noises. Maybe Gary was just an eccentric recluse who hoarded junk in those rooms. But my gut told me otherwise. The fear I felt in that house was real and primal. Gary's behavior set off every red flag and alarm bell in my mind. My instincts screamed at me to get as far away from him and that house of horrors as possible. I decided if I didn't see any reports of police activity soon, I would call in an anonymous tip about my suspicions at Gary's house. Surely I couldn't be the only person who got an ominous vibe from being inside. If I could provide authorities with enough reason to investigate, they would be able to discern if criminal activity was happening there. I didn't have concrete proof, but my statement could prompt a welfare check or search, and that could lead to answers. I had to trust that if Gary was up to something sinister, it would come to light. I tried to focus on getting my own life back in order, securing a new job, finding a safe apartment to live in. But thoughts of that foreboding house lingered in the back of my mind. I found myself driving by it a couple times, half hoping to see police surround the place and bust open those mysterious locked doors. But the house remained still, curtains tightly drawn as always. My mind replayed my encounter with Gary like a film reel on repeat. Every odd look, every strange comment. The image of those scratches around the door frames never left me. I became convinced there was something evil happening inside, and that I had come far too close to danger. Moving forward, I vowed to be more cautious and listen to my intuition. Never again would I ignore those primal alarm bells going off in my mind. Survival depends on heeding those warnings, no matter how improbable or extreme they may seem. I'm grateful I got out unscathed, but I often think of those who may not have been so lucky. I was moving into my new apartment and needed some furniture quick and cheap. I browsed Craigslist and found a practically new sofa listed for only $200. The seller said it was barely used and they were selling it because they were moving. I contacted them immediately since it seemed like such a good deal. We arranged a time for me to come see the sofa at their place. When I got there, a man answered the door and led me inside. He seemed friendly enough, even helping me load the sofa into my car after I agreed to buy it. I didn't think much of the interaction at the time. I was just excited to have a nice new sofa for my apartment at such a bargain price. Over the next few days, I started to feel like I was being watched whenever I was home. I'd see a car parked across the street that looked similar to the seller's. Strange noises outside my window at night kept me awake, My gut told me something wasn't right. One day, I looked out and saw the seller standing on the sidewalk staring up at my apartment. I recognized him right away. My heart started racing. Why was he watching my place? Did he know my schedule? Was he planning to break in? I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That a man who sold me a sofa was now lurking around outside my building. I decided to confront him myself. I went downstairs and outside, but he was already driving away. I tried to get his license plate, but couldn't quite make it out. For the next few weeks, the odd occurrences continued. I'd catch glimpses of him across the street or in the neighborhood. Strange cars were always parked nearby. I hardly slept at night, listening for any unusual sounds. One evening, I heard footsteps outside my door, followed by jiggling of the door handle. Terror washed over me. I braced myself, gripping a baseball bat for protection. After a few tense moments, the jiggling stopped. I heard him walk away. I peered through the peephole and saw his shadowy figure retreating down the hall. In the morning light, my fear turned to anger. I was done being stalked and harassed by this man. I installed outdoor cameras to capture evidence and changed all my locks. I went to the police station and filed a report. The cops increased patrols around my block, but said there wasn't much else they could do since he hadn't directly threatened me. I debated moving out, but I refused to be driven out of my home. Instead, I got a can of mace and took self-defense classes. I remained vigilant, reporting any suspicious activity to the police. I had to completely change my habits and routines to avoid being predictable. After a few tense months, the creepy incidents tapered off. I stopped seeing the man lurking around. I hoped he had gotten bored and moved on to harass someone else. I stayed cautious, keeping my new security measures in place, but slowly I began to feel safe in my own home again. Buying that sofa from Craigslist turned my life into a nightmare. The experience taught me you can never be too careful with online transactions. You never know if seemingly ordinary people have ulterior motives. I was grateful I escaped unharmed, although the emotional toll was significant. My home should have been my refuge, for it was invaded by a predator. I survived the encounter, but I'll never look at Craigslist the same way again. I tried to push the scary events out of my mind and move on with my life, but I couldn't shake the lingering unease. I found myself obsessed with searching for any trace of the man online. I examined Craigslist ads daily to see if he was selling anything else. I even drove back to the neighborhood where he had lived to see if he was still around. Part of me needed closure that he was gone for good. The hypervigilance started impacting my daily functioning. I had trouble concentrating at work. I stopped meeting up with friends, afraid to leave my apartment. I barely slept, listening for any sound out of the ordinary. Finally, my sister sat me down for a talk. She was worried about me and said I needed help. At first, I resisted, but deep down I knew she was right. The trauma of being stalked had taken a toll on my mental health. I started seeing a therapist who diagnosed me with PTSD. She helped me work through the fear and anxiety I still felt months later. With time, the counseling sessions allowed me to stop seeing that man's shadow around every corner. I regained a sense of normalcy and comfort in my own home. On the advice of my therapist, I took all the precautions I could in case the man ever returned. I made sure to park my car where it couldn't be tampered with. I never left windows unlocked. I avoided walking alone at night, but I also had to accept I did everything in my power already and try not to obsess over the what-ifs. With my sister's support, I started socializing again and pursuing hobbies that brought me joy. Focusing on the positives helped me realize I refused to be a victim. I became an advocate for others who went through similar stalking situations. I shared my story to raise awareness in the community. Years later, out of the blue, I got a message on social media from the man who had tormented me. He apologized for his past behavior and said he had gotten mental health treatment. He claimed he just wanted to make amends. I deleted it without responding. I didn't owe him anything, not even a moment's more thought. While I'm proud of my strength, his actions still infuriate me. He robbed me of my sense of safety and freedom. The hypervigilance remains even now, but I don't live in fear anymore. My home is my sanctuary once again thanks to taking back control. I won't be intimidated or driven out, and I'm cautioning others to stay safe. The internet has opened our lives up to strangers in frightening ways. But in the end, I survived my personal cyberstalking nightmare. I'm stronger now. I had just moved into my new house and was still getting settled in. The previous owners had left the place in pretty bad shape, with a lot of little repairs needed here and there. Not wanting to spend a fortune hiring professional contractors for every little thing, I decided to try finding a handyman on Craigslist who could tackle some of the smaller jobs for a reasonable rate. I scanned through the listings and one post stood out, a handyman named Bill who had lots of great reviews from previous customers raving about his skills and affordable prices. He seemed friendly and eager to help in his response to my inquiry, so I decided to hire him. Bill came over the next day ready to work. I showed him around the house and pointed out some of the minor repairs I needed done. A leaky faucet, a squeaky door hinge, a loose tile in the bathroom. He had brought his own tools and got right to work. I was impressed by how quickly and efficiently he moved through each task. This guy really knew his stuff. Within just a few hours, he had completed everything on my list. I paid him the agreed upon amount and thanked him for his time. After Bill left, I felt so relieved to finally have those little fixes taken care of. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine in my new home, but a creeping, uneasy feeling started to build inside me. Small things seemed out of place or didn't seem quite right. My keys weren't on their usual hook by the front door where I always left them. The dishes in the kitchen cupboard were arranged slightly differently. The thermostat was set to a temperature I never would have picked. Tiny details that were hard to pinpoint exactly, but enough to raise my suspicions. I tried convincing myself it was just my own forgetfulness in an unfamiliar environment, but the feeling that something wasn't right intensified. I started questioning if I was just being paranoid. Then one day, I reached to open the bathroom drawer and realized the handle had been reversed to open from the opposite side. A chill went down my spine. I knew I hadn't changed that myself. That's when it hit me. Bill. He had been alone in the house doing those repairs. What else had he been up to that I didn't know about? My mind started racing, imagining all the things he could have done. What if he made a copy of my key? What if he loosened the lid on a pipe as an excuse to come back? What if he planted hidden cameras or microphones? I inspected every inch of the house, looking for anything that seemed unusual or out of place. When I didn't find any mysterious devices, I started to think maybe I was overreacting after all. But I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that I was being watched in my own home, that my privacy had been invaded. I decided to change the locks, just to be safe. I avoided posting any more ads on Craigslist. I learned my lesson. Hiring a stranger off the internet is a risky move. From then on, I was much more cautious about bringing workers into my home. I only hired licensed professionals, even if it cost more. And I invested in a home security system with cameras visible outside to deter any uninvited guests. Perhaps I let my imagination run wild, creating unlikely scenarios in my head. If Bill really did have sinister intentions, I'll never know for certain. But the sense of unease, the violation of my personal space, lingered long after he was gone. I refused to feel unsafe in my own home ever again. In the weeks that followed, I found myself growing more and more paranoid. I would double-check the locks multiple times before bed. I jumped at small noises I would normally ignore. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, even in the comfort of my own home. My friends tried to reassure me it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but they hadn't been there to experience the subtle yet unsettling changes after Bill's visit. They didn't understand the bone-chilling terror of thinking someone could be lurking, spy on you at any moment. So I stopped confiding in friends and kept my fears bottled up, but the stress was getting to me. I had trouble eating and sleeping. I lost weight rapidly. Dark circles formed under my eyes. One particularly windy night, branches scraping the side of the house startled me out of bed. My heart pounded, my hands shook. I realized living like this was unsustainable. The next morning, I called a highly rated therapist and made an appointment. I knew I needed help breaking free of this paranoia that had taken over my life. The therapist listened with patience and empathy. She normalized my reactions, explaining hypervigilance was a common response to trauma, even a minor one like suspecting a break-in. Together we walked through grounding exercises to bring me back to the present moment, rather than being caught up in the swirling thoughts of what might have happened. With her guidance, I felt my anxiety and fear gradually loosening their grip. She encouraged me to take back power by reclaiming my space, rather than continuing to feel like a victim in my own home. So I did an intensive clean of the house, reorganizing things exactly how I wanted. I brought in new furniture and decor, erasing any remaining trace of the past. Light, bright colors replaced the dated, dingy ones left over from the previous owners. Once the physical space felt like my own, my mindset started to shift as well. I played upbeat music and opened windows to let fresh air and sunlight stream in. I took up yoga, meditating each morning in my newly calming living room. I still took reasonable precautions, changed locks, security system, etc., but I no longer felt hostage to the what-ifs swirling in my mind. And if those worries crept back in, I had tools to acknowledge them without being controlled by them. While it took time, I regained my sense of safety and peace in my home. A horrifying Craigslist experience served as a lesson on the importance of being cautious, but also not allowing fear to dictate my life. With the right support, I found I was stronger than I realized, and my home could feel like a sanctuary once again. I had just gone through a bad breakup and was feeling lonely, so I decided to try my luck on Craigslist. I posted an ad in the personal section looking to meet someone new. To my surprise, I got a response from someone named Dane pretty quickly. From the email exchanges, Dane seemed nice and normal. We agreed to meet up for dinner at a restaurant downtown. When I got to the restaurant, Dane was already seated at a table. My first impression was that he looked just like his photos, tall, muscular, with short brown hair. He stood up to give me a hug. So far, so good. We sat down and started making small talk about our jobs and hobbies. Dane said he was a construction worker and liked going to the gym in his spare time. About 15 minutes into the date, though, Dane started making odd comments. He mentioned that he thought I had a killer body and would love to see me in a bikini. I laughed it off nervously and changed the subject. As the dinner continued, Dane started sharing strange opinions, like how he didn't trust the government and believed cell phones were melting our brains. He also made a few casually racist remarks about our waitress. I started to feel really uncomfortable. When our food arrived, Dane insisted on switching plates with me so he could try my dish. It seemed weirdly controlling. As we finished up eating, he started suggesting activities for the rest of the date. Things like going to a shooting range, an abandoned warehouse, or a secret hiking trail he knew about. I told him I wasn't really interested in any of that. Dane looked annoyed but said we could just get another drink somewhere instead. At the bar, Dane ordered drinks for both of us without asking me what I wanted. When I took out my wallet to pay for my drink, he became angry and demanded to cover the bill. His tone made me shrink back into my seat. After we finished our drinks, Dane said he had one last idea. We should go back to his place, and he could show me his martial arts skills. I made up an excuse about having to get home to my dog. Dane was clearly frustrated. He paid the bill hastily while muttering under his breath. As we left the bar, he gripped my arm firmly and steered me toward his car. I wrenched my arm away and said I would get my own ride home. Dane's face darkened. For a second, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he swore at me and stormed off towards his car. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone to request an Uber. I felt terrified, but also angry with myself for not trusting my instincts sooner. Dane had seemed charming at first, but was obviously unstable and potentially dangerous. I vowed to be much more cautious about meeting strangers from the internet. From now on, I would only agree to meet in public places and let a friend know where I was going. The experience taught me that you never really know someone based on online interactions alone. Unlucky things didn't escalate further with Dane. My close call was unnerving, but could have been much worse. Others may not be so fortunate when encountering volatile people online. We have to look out for each other's safety. One simple date with a seemingly nice person can quickly turn into a nightmare in the hands of the wrong man. I'll be sharing my story as a warning to others considering online dating. You can't be too careful out there. Trust your gut if something feels off. Your comfort and safety should always come first, no matter how nice they may initially seem. After I got home that night, I couldn't stop replaying everything that had happened with Dane. The more I thought about it, the more frightened I became. I kept imagining what he might have done if I had agreed to any of his suggestions to go somewhere private. I had a feeling Dane's intentions were sinister despite his charming facade at first. Over the next few days, I became increasingly paranoid. I jumped at every little sound in my apartment, fearing Dane would show up. I had nightmares where I would wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming he was lurking outside my bedroom. Logically, I knew he didn't know where I lived, but I was still shaken from our encounter. I decided to tell a few close friends about the unnerving date. Talking it through helped relieve some of my anxiety. My friends agreed I should report Dane to the police so he hopefully wouldn't harm anyone else. But without any evidence of an actual crime, the police said there was nothing they could do. Still, making the report made me feel a bit better. In the following weeks, I withdrew from socializing or dating. I was wary of meeting anyone new. Before, I had been dumb about the dangers that could lurk behind a seemingly harmless online profile. But Dane's chilling behavior was my wake-up call. Eventually, after much self-reflection, I regained enough courage to tentatively dip my toe back into online dating. This time, however, I took every precaution possible. I researched how to date safely online and followed all the guidelines. I made sure we video chatted before agreeing to meet up. The first few meetups were in very public places during the day. I told a friend the details of who I was meeting and where. While it took some time to bounce back from my unsettling experience with Dane, I didn't want to live in fear forever. I realized there are risks with online dating, but there are also good people out there too. I just needed to have my guard up and be smart about things. Although I will never forget that nightmare date, I refuse to let it stop me from trying to find love. The world has all kinds of people online and in real life. I won't assume every new person is dangerous, but I won't ignore red flags again either. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.